Welcome to the forum today. I'm going to let David Simmons, our Director of Music and Organist, introduce two very special guests that have been here for the weekend and are joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Rector Hodges, for inviting us to this forum. I think it died. We'll just have to speak loudly. I'm delighted to introduce two friends that I made in Seattle this summer. Actually, one of them goes back a little bit farther than that. Jessica French is a composer who lives in Seattle, Washington, and Charles Anthony Silvestri, who goes by Tony, is a poet and just very generous collaborator of all things literary. I think might be one way to describe what you do. I should probably just let him describe it. But the three of us had this idea this summer that we wanted to write a piece of music together. Jessica and I had been in conversation about writing a piece for our annual Epiphany Carol service. This is something we hold on the second Sunday of January every year. And we've done that since my arrival here at St. Peter's in 2016. So it's really sort of the longest tradition that I brought with my tenure. We had one idea sort of going, but as we attended a workshop at this convention in Seattle at which Tony was a panelist, we thought, well, wait a minute, maybe we should change tracks and try to involve Tony in this collaboration and get a brand new carol text and write a new anthem. So in fact, that's what we've done. We've written a new carol. Tony has written the words. Jessica has written the music. We had a very lively day yesterday rehearsing the music with both of them present. And it was a very, very collaborative and exciting process. The piece sounds very, very different than I thought it was going to. So I'm very excited about the results that we have so far, and I think what will happen later today. So since we are a church, I thought we could get this kind of conversation about creativity and this collaboration going with a bit of scripture. So this is some scripture that we're very fond of in my house. It comes from chapter 2 of the second book of Winnie the Pooh. And this is by A.A. Milne. Pooh is writing a poem about Tigger, and he concludes the poem this way. But whatever his weight in pounds, shillings, and ounces, he always seems bigger because of his bounces. And that's the whole poem, Pooh said. Do you like it, Piglet? All except the shillings, said Piglet. I don't think they ought to be there. They wanted to come in after the pounds, explained Pooh. So I let them. It's the best way to write poetry, letting things come. So I wanted to turn this over to a poet, and let's see if that mic is working. Is letting things come the best way to write a poem?
I would have to agree with Pooh on that. When I start a process, very often what I write is for a composer. And so I start with a long conversation with the composer about what she wants, what structure of piece, what is the commission parameters, like what's it for, like an Epiphany service and so on. And so that helps inform where I begin. And then I look for what I call the DNA of a poem. I look for a seed. A foundation stone around which I can begin to build. And very often, there are forces at work that I am not in control of. And a word will suggest itself, or a pair of words, or an image, or something that the composer said in our conversation. I will have put a circle around it in my notes, and I want that to become a kind of seed. And so I'll begin to build something around that. And so I think the way I would interpret the scriptural passage is to be open, to have my heart open to what the Spirit is telling me and showing me. Very often I feel like I'm a vehicle for something else, for something greater than myself. And my role is to do what I'm told and get out of the way. And often magic happens that way. And it was this way with this poem. I really, in a kind of Jesuit way, I sort of meditated on the idea of this particular scriptural passage and then look at it from a different angle, a different perspective, and just see what happens. So yeah, having an open heart to what's happening is an important part of this process.
Great. And maybe at this point we should also say that the title of piece that you wrote, Jessica, is Fix Your Eyes Upon the Star. And it is an Epiphany carol about the scriptural star which the wise men, the magi, see and travel toward. So, Jessica, I also have some scripture for you from the same prophet. This is from chapter 9, book 2. Pooh likes to hum his poems as he sings them. Because poetry and hums aren't things which you get, they're things which get you, and all you can do is to go where they can find you. And then at this point in the story, Pooh sings his song. It's come different from what I thought it would, but it's come. So, Jessica, when you write music, how do you go to a place where music can find you, and does it always come the way that you expect?
That's a great question. It never comes the way I expect. That's for sure. And I have to, kind of like what Tony said, I have to get out of the way, because I agree with that thought where I'm kind of a vessel for this spiritual inspiration that comes to me. A lot of these ideas that I end up with, I feel like are not my own. They're just handed to me. It's almost like someone's singing it to me in my head, and I'm merely putting it in my computer or writing it down. So sometimes I feel like I didn't write it, but then I come in and do the craft part of it and make sure it's singable, the choir can sing it, that it's, people will like the melody kind of thing. But a lot of the time there's also unexpected things that you hear, or what was so magical about yesterday in the rehearsal, hearing the choir sing it and have the librettist next to me and both of us hearing different things and trying different things and saying, why don't we try this vowel? What if we sing this softer here at the end? What if we do this? And I didn't even think about it that way, but then you hear it and it's like, wow, that was magical. So I think those are the moments that are actually, for me, the most interesting, because you don't expect them and they end up being the most magical anyway. So I'm always trying to get out of the way, like Tony said, and let things happen, because I sometimes think, oh, it has to be this way, I should write it this way. But usually those aren't the most interesting moments in the end. So,
Great.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. No, I think the choir well knows what a real conversation we were able to have kind of with the choir and the way that we rehearse things. We are coming from 3 different geographies. You're out on the West Coast. You're here in the Midwest, Tony. But yesterday was the first day we were all in the same room, and I just wonder your reflections on that idea of the creative process. Your idea about how something can go, and then of course hearing the music for the first time, receiving the words for the first time, and then the 3 of us working together for the first time. What is this process like, and what does this mean to you and your work?
I'll start with that. I would say I write poetry for composers, and so 99 times out of 100, I write a poem in isolation, in a bubble. I get the poem to its completed form, and then I hand it off to the composer, who then does their work in a bubble, in complete isolation. And there might be some email exchange, some tweaking that occurs. Very rarely I'll get the music first, and I'll have to create a text for an already existing piece of music. But the times when it's most magical, when it's most amazing, is when the composer and I can be in the same space together, where music can happen, either at the composer's piano or with a choir present or whatever. It's the moment that we had yesterday was what I wish it could always be from the beginning of the process, where collaborative minds and creators of the work and then those who are going to execute the work can be together in the same space. That is a very, very powerful, magical, organic, wonderful thing, and I wish they could all be like that.
Yes, and also for me, Tony's the second librettist that I've worked with, but this is the first time I've actually got to talk to someone and be in the same room with the choir and have that experience. And it was, I'll say, magical again, because it was something I've never experienced before. I've been given many texts, a lot of scriptural texts, poems that were written, years ago, hundreds of years ago, where the poet is no longer alive. So I set the music, and then the choir and I talk about the musical aspects, and that's mostly the focus. But the fact that the text really is the driving force to this, and to have the person who wrote the text and just working together all in the same room was something I've never experienced before. And I think, especially in church music, I haven't experienced that as much. And I think it is so important, because once Tony was telling the choir to focus on the text, to use more consonants, to think about what the text means to them, just listening to it was night and day. It was a complete difference when they sang a phrase the second time. And so experiencing that was incredible. And so yes, I think it's extremely important that happens more often. So.
It's so valuable as a choir director to have outside voices come in and to have that emphasis on the text. It is something we strive for, but it is something that we're liable to sort of pay less attention to than we should. So your advocacy of that, Tony, was understandable, but also really important. I do want to drill down on that idea about the word, because there's a wonderful connection to the service that we'll do later today, and that idea of the word itself. So the service begins. This is not Winnie the Pooh. This is actual scripture now. With the Gospel of John, the prologue hymn to the Gospel of John. If you're familiar with the King's College Lessons and Carols service at Christmas, this lesson is invariably associated with the end of that service. And so it's a wonderful sort of connection to the Christmas season that we begin our Epiphany service with that same lesson. And this service is a little bit unusual in that it doesn't begin with music. It actually begins with the Word. And here's the words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. There's this idea in this gospel about creation through the Word, and I think this harkens back to the beginning of Genesis, when at the creation of the world, it's not something that God did, it's something that God spoke. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Creation itself is brought about through the Word. And some of the fervor with which you were talking to us about your text really sort of made a connection in my mind about that idea of the Word, the holiness of the Word, its creative potential, its creative energy, and the fact that words, like everything else, come from God, and that these two are holy tools. And through the carol that you wrote, I think you're trying to, well, I'll let you say what you're trying to do, but I would say as a Christian church musician, that part of our role in this work is co-creation with God, that we have been created to take part in this holy work of creation. And so do you, I'll just let you speak to that. Do you have a role in that?
Yeah. I'd like to reference another one of my scriptures, which is Tolkien's work. And in the Silmarillion, Ilúvatar, God of Middle-earth, basically sings the world into being. The world is a song. And I loved that image, that the combination of words and music is creative beauty. And we are participating in creation in that respect. I had something really great that I was going to say, and then the Tolkien took me on a different. Well, remind me, what was your question, David?
About co-creation with through the Word.
Oh, yeah. I think what I was going to say is that choir music starts with text. That's what a choir does. That's what a choir can do that a string orchestra can't do. And so if a choir is not going to enunciate the text, if they're not going to focus on the text, then the composer is probably better served by having their music performed by a string orchestra. The string orchestra has all the same vocal ranges as a choir, and they don't have to breathe, ever. And so, I mean, string orchestra is better than a choir, basically. But what a choir can do that no other ensemble can do is communicate text. And what I find is that the music of the composer opens the heart of the listener, whether it's an audience or a congregation. The heart is opened by music, the way it is in a movie, right? Watch a movie without a soundtrack, and it's just not the same kind of experience. The heart is opened so that the poet's truth, the human truth that's being expressed in the poetry, can come through. And so when I write religious poetry, when I'm commissioned by a group, and I do want to thank the St. Peter's community for allowing us as creators to do this wonderful, magical thing that we so rarely get to do, work together. And so your generosity made that possible. When I have the opportunity to write a religious text, I want to approach it from a different point of view. I want to tell a familiar story, but in a way that makes the listener say, I never thought about that way before. churchy things are so familiar to us, and Christmas is the most familiar, the most comfortable of all the parts of the churchy year for us. And we take so much for granted and don't stop to think about what these carols are and what stories they tell and who the real people were that experienced these amazing things. And so in this particular carol, I try to inhabit the Magi, these Zoroastrian priests coming from Iran, Persia, and Mesopotamia, drawn by this force that they don't quite understand. It's the old gods recognizing the new God, and the world before Christ coming to grips with a new reality, which is maybe a perspective that doesn't often get talked about. So that's how I try to inhabit the Word and realize that I have a role to play in what we need to hear and in what God wants to say.
And one of the distinctions I was sort of hoping to draw today, and maybe there's not much of one, is that kind of sacred secular divide, because we are kind of doing music in a sacred context today. But I know that both of you are equally familiar and comfortable in secular settings. So Jessica, I'll turn to you now. Do you feel that you personally have a role in the ongoing creation of the universe? And I especially want to ask you about the creation of light and color, because I think you might have something to say to that.
Yes. I mean, just again, that co-creation thing is real. Like, I feel like, the inspiration I hear or feel is divine, and I can only attribute that to God, because I can't explain it. And so those ideas that I get, I feel like I need to, and when there's a text that like Tony's text that I really want to bring out, I feel like it's a sacred experience, and I take it very seriously, and then I hand it off to the singers. They're the ones that get to express that, and then the listeners get to experience it. What was the second question? Oh, the colors. I do have something called synesthesia, which is a neurological phenomenon, I suppose you'd call it. It's basically a linking of senses. So certain composers have it. I mean, not just composers or artists, other people have it. But it's basically a linking where if I hear a note, I associate a color with it. So like A, if I hear it, if someone plays an A, I see green. It's not like the color comes in front of me, but it's like if you visualize the color green, it's an automatic association, and it's always the same color every time. It's not a chosen thing, it's just how it is. And I've had this since I can remember, and I thought everyone had it until you learn later in life that nope, not everybody has this. But what's so fun about it is especially with text, because it's not just with notes, it's with words. Days of the week, names have a color. So when I read a text, it's full of colors. It's almost overwhelming, actually. Letters have color. So when I take a text and I start to internalize the text and really familiarize myself with it, I will take certain words that are especially important, like the Magi or the star, and that might be a particular color to me. And so I will sometimes, not even always consciously, end up in a certain key center or use a certain note in the piece that is that same color that I hear. Is that what you were asking me? Yeah. And so with light, we're talking a lot, this piece talks about the star. Sometimes it's not even a particular note, it's more of the sopranos are holding a high note for a long time with another note next to theirs that shimmers. To me, I see a shimmery color. And so I'm trying to evoke that beauty and that brightness of this star that the Magi have never seen before, something that they're experiencing. So I'll do things like that to kind of bring out, and I know people don't see the colors that I see necessarily, but I hope the listener and the singers will at least experience something that is similar. So.
And so if you would, maybe give us a specific preview of one or two moments in the piece that we'll hear this afternoon. Mm-hmm. Are there some words that come to mind with a certain color for you?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think specifically, but for the one moment I will say, it's not a particular word that I can think of, but sometimes the sopranos and altos will be holding something, and it'll be kind of higher up and sustained while the lower voices stop singing for a moment. There's one moment where they they close to we're now going to do an NG instead of a hum, but it's a humming sound, and you just hear that sustained for a moment. That's kind of a shimmery, it's actually an orange and a green color, just because those two notes are that color. But it's, when I see the colors, they're almost like stained glass, to be honest. They're kind of this luminous, glowing color. And so the hope is that you'll feel this shimmery sense in a way. I'm trying to think of specific words. It might take me a minute to think of the words that I'm focusing on.
Is there anything on star?
Star. It's funny, like, it's more just fix your eyes upon the star, not necessarily was a color thing, it was more, that melody came to me instantly. That was the first thing I heard. So you'll hear, fix your eyes upon the star, and that comes back again. So that's actually not a color thing, that's more of a motive thing. But honestly, it wasn't specific words necessarily in this piece that had a color, it was more the idea of a sustained star. Mm-hmm. So you'll kind of just hear moments where things are held. I think those are probably the biggest parts.
That's great. Tony, you alluded to the familiarness of the Christmas and Epiphany stories, and I think what you said is very true, that it's easy to be very comfortable with what we hear at Christmas, and everyone in this room is probably nervous. Oh, new music, what is this going to sound like? Well, you heard a snippet just now. But what is the value in writing, for you, I guess, as a creator, what is the value in exploring the story through new words and new music? I was struck this year on Christmas Day when we said the psalm, the very first words of the psalm on Christmas Day, sing a new song to the Lord. There is this idea at Christmas that we are supposed to do something new. I think we are encouraged in Scripture and at Christmas to do this creative work for musicians and poets. I think it means doing exactly what we're doing. So could you speak to that impulse, if you have it, and the result for you as you kind of process those familiar stories?
These are really good questions and hard ones to answer on the fly. Being part of a creative process is very spiritually rewarding, I think, and it's choir is how I pray. Music in church is integral to my own spirituality, and so to be able to take my place in the amazing parade of composers and poets and prophets who have provided the inspiration and words and music for the church, capital C, to use in worship. It's very humbling, and it's a great feeling. And so I don't take that responsibility lightly. And I think it is easy for us to kind of shoot stuff out at Christmas in a familiar way. Whenever I'm asked to write a Christmas text, I think the point that I always try to make is the newness. You talk about sing a new song. The nativity is like the newest thing ever. It's the most important event in the human story. That the creator of the universe would decide to come to our planet and to be born as a human baby. That's just a magnum mysterium beyond all mysteries. Why? How? How lucky are we? Wow. And so that wow aspect of Christmas is what really appeals to me. But I also love the idea that there was 250,000 years of human history before the birth of Jesus. And those folks, they were longing for something too. And they tried in their clunky ways to express that spirituality. But the story was different than the way that they thought it was going to go. And I'm fascinated by that dynamic of the pre-Christian world in dialogue with the Christian world. As a scholar, I'm a Roman historian, and I'm most fascinated with the Roman frontier, where Romans, mostly soldiers, had to interact with people on the farthest fringes of the empire, and how the cultures interacted and fused. Also, as Christianity was beginning to emerge, how it competed with and then ultimately triumphed over all of the whole buffet of spiritual choices that the Roman world had. I love those dialogues and the way that those things interact with each other. And so that's what I try to bring to Christmas. That's the, I never thought about that before, sort of aspect of Christmas texts for me. I don't know, I'm rambling.
No, that's great. You want to speak to that? was sort of the idea of creating something new at Christmas?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow all of that, but I think, because it's great, but I think the newness that Tony mentioned, I think is great. Like, that was what was most enjoyable for me with this process, was a brand new text on the Epiphany and Christmas, and where, you know, many people have given me texts to set. I've written quite a few Christmas texts now, and I'm very happy to do that. But they're usually texts like Christina Rossetti. She's no longer alive. I could never talk to her about her text or what her meaning was behind that, besides what I could interpret or what others have interpreted. So having a new text and a new way to describe something that we celebrate every year, I think gives it more energy, instead of, just another Christmas carol that we've done. And even if the music is new, the text is something we're all still familiar with. So I think it just brings a whole new energy to it. And I think that's the other reason I really have enjoyed this process so much. And like Tony was saying, finding different ways to look at the story and to think about the story and the people that were in the story and their perspective and what they were experiencing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and Jessica, I just want to say how natural it feels to have you here, because the choir and the congregation, I think, are becoming increasingly familiar with your music now. A couple Christmases ago, we did sing your Christina Rossetti text at Christmas. Love Came Down at Christmas. It's a wonderful anthem. It was one of the first things we read when we assembled to sing sort of right after quarantine. We were still singing outdoors. And the choir was very enthusiastic about that piece. And in fact, it was their enthusiasm that sort of put me over the edge to say, okay, we better do it this Christmas. Another one of your pieces also had a pretty significant place in our kind of returning to form, your Tantum Ergo setting, which I wanted you to speak about that piece, because you had some insight into something that you are writing but you're not quite sure about, and you don't know if you're going to finish the completion of the project. And would you be comfortable sharing about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Tantum Ergo, I wrote that, it was still within the pandemic. I mean, it wasn't like lockdown period, but a little after that. It was funny, this was not a commission, this was me just trying to because I think with commissions, I'm expected to do the piece, I know it's gonna happen, I do it. But this was just all me, like kind of trusting myself and writing something and just putting it out there, which felt a lot different. And it was funny, it was actually a melody that I composed when I was in high school, but I didn't think I was gonna be a composer. That was part of my AP music class that I was taking, and it was an assignment thing. But it was like rolling around in my head, and I'm like, I better do something. It's kind of like talk about the co-creation and when you get the inspiration, I feel like there's a reason for it, and so I went with it. And I remember, David and I have been in touch since our IU days. We went to college together, and so I was telling him about it. He's like, could we be the ones to premiere it? And and I was like, of course, absolutely. It'd be nice to have a choir like this to sing it. And then that actually put it on the map. I'm so thankful to David, because suddenly all these other churches, Episcopal churches especially, were really interested in it. And now it's pretty good. It went to Japan this year, actually. It's kind of gone all over the place, and I thank David for that. But it was so exciting to hear. He sent me the recording of the rehearsal, the choir sang it the first time. And there's nothing more thrilling to a composer than hearing your piece actually come to life and have real people singing it, and to experience it. And then I think they really enjoyed singing it, and that made me very happy, because it really, it meant something. So I don't know what else to say, but it was a wonderful experience, and I'm really thankful to David for doing my music here. And now I'm just so happy to finally be here in person after these 2 years of Zoom and all of that.
And just a note that the congregation at 10:30 will hear that Tantum Ergo as the anthem, along with some of Jessica's new organ music before and after the service at 10:30. And it's been an honor for us to premiere that piece, Tantum Ergo, and as it will be today with Fix Your Eyes Upon the Star. And I hope for both of your sakes that one also has a long and very happy life as it leaves our walls. So, I think just briefly at the end, I'd like to turn it over to questions. I know the choir had some questions about Jessica's colors, and I hope we delved into that. But please.
Yeah, David, I had a group question for all three of you. At what age was there music or words filling your creativity? What age range did it sort of light a fire and then flame up and make you the people you are today?
It's a good
So
question.
it's like a kid question.
Yeah.
Winnie the Pooh.
Yes. Well, I'll start. I mean, I think around 5 years old, my parents were encouraged to get a piano, and my sort of musical soul, I think, just flourished at the keyboard and just improvising naturally from a very young age.
I would agree. I think a lot of the seeds of who I became as an adult, now when I look back at my childhood, were all present there. The lesson for me when I was raising my own kids was watch for those seeds. Your kids are telling you what kind of people they want to be and they need to be, and so it's been fun to watch my kids grow into that.
Well, the musical stuff, I think I was around 6. I was playing at my grandma's house, and she had a piano. We didn't have a piano because I didn't play the piano, but she was taking lessons with a good friend of hers, and I just started playing by ear. I would listen to Beatles songs and go and play them on the piano. And my mom's like, I think you should start taking lessons. And so that was my first beginning into creation. But I love to create since I was young. I love art, I love writing, I love playing piano. I started singing. Singing was another huge way and so I was surrounded by words and music since I was young. So,
Same.
yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
So, Tony, as a poet, I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about a quote from the A.R. Ammons from his classic essay, A Poem is a Walk. It's from 1968, if you've ever read it. And one of the things he says is that in a poem or writing that a world comes into being, and any statement about it, however revelatory, is a lessening. So the idea that you put these words out there and this kind of literary analysis can kind of lessen the piece. So do you think of, as a poet who writes for composers, that music is a form of literary analysis
Yeah,
that
interesting
can
question.
be revelatory or a lessening of the words that you give them?
That's really, really an interesting question.
I'll give you that.
Wow. I'm always thrilled and terrified when I attend a premiere of a work. I wonder, I put so much music into my poetry. I'm writing specifically that my words be sung. And that informs my vowel choices, it informs the way that I structure lines, it informs where the volta of the poem goes. I really think about it as a future octavo, right? So part of my process is intentionally giving a composer something for them to do with it what they will. But it's always terrifying when I hear a premiere. It's like, oh, did they get it, right? Has the music enhanced the meaning of the poem and painted it in a way that will affect the listener in a way that the poem on the page alone wouldn't do? And I would say 9 times out of 10 that's the case. That I'm lucky as a poet that people experience my poetry with custom-made soundtracks. That's how I look at it. Occasionally there's a clunker, but my role is as a servant. When I'm writing, I'm the servant of the composer because I know that after the piece is created, everyone is the servant of the poem. So that's how I would answer that.
And one thought that I have about that, especially at Christmas, is incarnation. That as creators, we have to make choices. We have to choose one route or the other. And I think there is a parallel to God coming into the world in a specific form, in a specific human body. And I think in some ways, these poems, this music, is a kind of embodiment, a creative embodiment. So yes, we might all do it differently, but that's sort of also the gift of incarnational creativity, is we get to choose what it's going to be like and give it flesh. Any thoughts?
I agree.
Okay.
I mean, and I think for me, it's just the combination of this, not just music, but text, and then to have us all present to experience it and to shape it, and to what makes it unique for this group, for this choir, commissioned by this church. I think makes it even more exciting because it's very specific.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to close with a quote from my favorite prophet again, Winnie the Pooh himself. This is actually a little bit larger. So this is the narrator of the Winnie the Pooh stories talking to Christopher Robin, his son. I do remember, Christopher Robin said, only Pooh doesn't very well. So that's why he likes having these stories told to him again, because then it's a real story and not just a remembering. And I think through your presence and your work with us today, you're helping us make this a real story once again. So I just couldn't be more grateful. It's just been such a thrill to have you here and to do this work together. And I just want to say a tremendous thank you for everything you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
And I'll just echo that thank you. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you for sharing your insights and your gifts and skills with us. It's wonderful to have you here. And thank you, David, for bringing these wonderful people and artists to us. Before we go, I want to ask Jacqueline and Weldon to come up here and join me for just a moment. As many of you know, for the last 9 years, Jacqueline has been a very valued and faithful member of our staff here at St. Peter's. And she has reached a point where she has decided that it's time for her to do the next thing in her professional life. She is joining a law firm here as a client information specialist. You'll continue to see her some on Sundays for a while, but I really appreciate all that Jacqueline has done, and I know that you do too. So I just want us to take a moment and thank her. And as you can tell, she really, really hates that. Thank you for being part of this. God bless.